So this is the iPhone 11. Released in 2019, this quickly became one of the most popular iPhones on the market, and due to the nice balance of features and price, it's kinda easy to see why. In fact, this Christmas season, more iPhone 11s were activated than pretty much any other phone. This, in part, being due to the release of the iPhone 12, meaning that the iPhone 11 was available at a lower price now. So, 1 year later, should you consider still buying the iPhone 11 in 2021? Let's find out. First off, as usual, we're going to be taking a look at the specs. The iPhone 11 is rocking an Apple A13 Bionic processor, which did actually provide some pretty awesome upgrades to this phone, which we are going to be talking about later. 4GB of RAM, either 64, 128, or 256GB of internal storage, which is a nice range to see as usual. I personally do have the 64GB version, and as usual, that is plenty for me. However, if you do want to put more local files on your phone, it is nice that you do have the option to get a little bit more storage. Of course, as always, we are going to be talking in more detail about what the specs mean in terms of performance later on, but it was still nice to see these incremental upgrades from the iPhone XS. As is common with what I like to refer to as the iPhone XR line of smartphones, the iPhone 11 does have multiple color options. The one I have here is black, but you can also get it in white, purple, yellow, mint, and red. It weighs in at 194 grams, which is on the heavier side for iPhones, especially considering that the iPhone 12 only actually weighed 164 grams. And while this is noticeable, especially side to side with the iPhone 12, I personally haven't had any hand fatigue issues when using this phone, so I wouldn't really say that it's a big deal. Of course, as I said before, we are going to be talking about how things perform later on in the video, along with other specs like the screen resolution and the battery size, but as usual, they are going to be in their respective sections later on, and as for the key specs, that's pretty much it. Next up, we have the build quality, and as this is a 2019 release from Apple, it is a slick combination of 7000 series aluminium as well as glass. In terms of build quality, the iPhone 11 is lacking in that ceramic shield technology that we saw in the iPhone 12, which I actually tested for real yesterday when I accidentally dropped my phone out my car window when I was trying to pay for food. Getting back to the iPhone 11 though, as it does lack this technology, I personally would recommend keeping a case on your iPhone 11, unless you're like very careful, because repair bills from Apple are not nice. Granted though, as it is a glass back, it feels amazing, it looks stunning, and from a design perspective, the iPhone 11 is pretty much dead on in my opinion. The iPhone 11 also features an IP68 water resistance rating, and the Apple spec sheet claims that the iPhone 11 can actually withstand up to 2 meters of water for 30 minutes. Now, I have actually tested this in my time using this phone, and it's worked great. However, as always, I probably wouldn't recommend getting your phone wet if you can avoid it. Yeah, this is more of a failsafe. Please don't go swimming with your phone. Next up, we have the screen, and honestly, this was one of the things that initially did put me off the iPhone 11. I mean, it was released in 2019 with an LCD screen and a resolution of 828 by 1792. It also wasn't as bright as its Pro counterpart with a brightness of 650 nits. However, during my usage of this phone, I really haven't found that to be a problem. While it would, of course, be nice to have a little bit of extra screen resolution, I find that in terms of brightness at least, even on the brightest days, I've had no issues with this phone. And chances are, unless you're directly on top of it, the low resolution probably won't be that big of a deal either. In terms of other features, it does have True Tone as well as haptic touch for that secondary interaction method. True Tone's been amazing for ages, so there's nothing new here. And while I did think I would miss 3D touch, honestly, nowadays, it is good enough to the point where I can't really tell the difference. Overall, the screen on the iPhone 11 may not seem all that impressive, especially for 2021. However, I think for most people at least, the screen on the iPhone 11 is totally fine. And if it wasn't for that slightly low resolution, I wouldn't really have anything bad to say about it at all. In terms of button layout, it's a notched iPhone, so it's pretty much the same as all the rest. Nice big isolated lock button, separate volume up and down buttons, a mute switch, and overall, this button layout is pretty much ideal. Due to it being an aluminium bezel iPhone, I've actually found the buttons to be slightly more tactile than their stainless steel counterparts, in my experience at least, leading to less accidental screenshots. And despite my love for the stainless steel bezels, this alone has actually made me slightly prefer them. After this, we have the Face ID, which is fantastic. The iPhone 11 really took the Face ID technology to the next level from the iPhone XS, expanding the angles from which your phone could be unlocked, speeding the whole thing up, and overall just improving the experience. For example, now you can unlock your phone on your leg and not have to pick it up and point it directly at your face. That's always good. And while before, Touch ID certainly was better in some areas, because of the extended angles, I think that Face ID pretty much removed the need for Touch ID permanently. As I said before, it's fast, accurate, and a pretty great biometric system for 2021. Up next, we're talking cameras. On the iPhone 11, we do see that dual camera system that's been consistent on the notch line of iPhones. However, compared to old models at least, this time, instead of having one standard and one telephoto, we actually have one standard and one ultra-wide. Both have a resolution of 12 megapixels, but the ultra-wide has an aperture of f2.4, whereas the standard has an aperture of f1.8. The front-facing or true depth camera is also now 12 megapixels and has an aperture of f2.2. In terms of performance, dynamic range, and color look amazing on the iPhone 11, in part thanks to the new A13 processor we talked about earlier, as well as the pixel-by-pixel processing, leading me to initially be pretty blown away by the level of dynamic range. As I said before, I do like having both focal lengths. However, if you want the best optical performance, then I would suggesting the wide angle, as the ultra-wide does tend to get a little bit distorted around the edges due to how wide it is. However, most of the time this isn't an issue, and it's still nice to see both. Portrait mode is also here, which is to be expected. It works on every lens but the ultra wide. It's accurate, and you can get some of that awesome looking full frame background blur without actually having to shell out on a full frame camera. Okay, so all of this is good. However, in my opinion, the biggest addition to this line of iPhones was the night mode. This was by far and wide my favorite feature on the iPhone 11 series, allowing for clean, crispy low light shots with minimal noise. And when I first tested it, I almost couldn't believe how good it looked. I also like the fact that you can control how long you expose your image for. So in theory, if you want to get a cleaner image, then technically you can expose your image for longer. And while it is only available on the regular lens, so you can't get any ultra wide night shots like you could on the iPhone 12, for A, how good it is, and B, the price of this phone, I can personally look past that. After this, we got video quality. The iPhone 11 shoots 4K at up to 60 FPS, including on the front camera, with extended dynamic range support on frame rates up to 60 FPS on the main camera and 30 FPS on the front-facing camera. Now, me personally, I do usually shoot in 24 FPS, so I get to take advantage of that all the time, and I've got to say, it is still very impressive, even a year later. In terms of slow motion, you do get up to 240 FPS in 1080p, and realistically, this looks like phone slow motion, but it is still nice to have, and if you ever want a quality bump, you can just switch to 120 FPS. That does look better. Slow fees are, of course, still here, and I still haven't found a use for them 1 year later. That's it. That's the segment. Overall, I'm very impressed with the camera on this thing. As I said, I think this is where we saw some of the biggest upgrades over previous iPhones, and while it's certainly not quite as good as it was on the iPhone 12, it comes pretty close in my opinion, and I think for most people, this is pretty much the perfect camera system. In terms of performance, which is arguably the most important part of any modern smartphone, the iPhone 11 still, to this day, does not disappoint. Back in 2019, it did ship with iOS 13, and honestly, if you want to buy this phone today, you really don't need to consider how long it's gonna last. Currently, of course, we are on iOS 14, and seeing as most iPhones do get around 5 years of support, you really don't need to consider its longevity anytime soon. In terms of OS performance, scrolling through the OS is lovely and smooth. Opening up stock apps and secondary interactions like summoning Siri are all pretty much instant, and honestly, it kind of feels like this phone could have been released this year. In terms of more intensive performance, with that A13 processor and the 4GB of RAM, I've personally never had any issues either playing games or streaming 4K video, and the performance that I've got out of this iPhone 11 pretty well matches up to my iPhone 12. Now, chances are in a few years the iPhone 12 will outperform the iPhone 11, but unless you plan on keeping this phone for literally 5 years, chances are it's pretty unlikely you're going to see any level of performance degradation anytime soon. After this, we have the speakers. To be honest, over the past few years, I have noticed the speakers on these phones gradually getting better. First of all, we had the stereo technology technology on the iPhone 7, and the iPhone 11 line actually went a step further by adding a new technology Apple dubbed spatial audio playback. Compared to the previous generation of iPhone, so the iPhone XS and the XR, the iPhone 11 series does sound notably louder and more full sounding. When either watching videos or casually listening to music, the internal speakers do certainly do a pretty good job. And while if you are sitting in a field in the summer and you want to play your friends your new mixtape, chances are you might want an external speaker, but for almost all casual use cases, I found the iPhone 11 speakers to be pretty damn good. Finally, we're going to be talking about the battery life. Now, of course, this was an area where I initially was really impressed, but how does it hold up 1 year later? Well, still pretty amazing. It has a max capacity of 3,110 milliamp hours, which is pretty large, especially considering that it's an iPhone. And honestly, I'd go as far to say that the iPhone 11 battery life is noticeably better than the battery life on the iPhone 12. It just seems to keep going and going. And while this may be down to, at least to a point, the lower screen resolution, battery life performance is battery life performance, and I will always be confident getting through my day with this thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the option for MagSafe charging like you get with the iPhone 12, but as I've said before, I actually do prefer charging wired anyway, so as long as you're willing to give MagSafe up, there really are very few bad things I can actually say about the iPhone 11's battery. Okay, so summarizing, the iPhone 11 is still a pretty phenomenal value phone. You get that notched iPhone design with a fantastic battery, a pretty great camera, and as long as you're not expecting the screen to be top of the line, chances are it's going to be very difficult to go wrong with the iPhone 11 in 2021, especially due to that new price drop. All right, guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, what do you think of the iPhone 11? Do you have one? Do you plan to buy one? Always like reading your comments. As for now, though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video. If you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.